Hello, Caroline. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. I'm seeing your organization all over on LinkedIn, providing a lot of content and value for fintechs. And before we dive into Innovate Finance, I want to ask you about yourself. Maybe give us a little bit of a background, even before about your role, about you.
Sure, happy to. So I've been in the company almost 6 years, almost at the beginning of the founding team. Before that, I spent 10 years in financial services at Bloomberg. So selling into hedge fund clients, then selling into the sell side so hedge fund clients in New York post crash. And then I came over here in the midst of the European crisis and sold to international banks in the UK and the sell side when the way they were getting paid was different. So I've always worked in times of volatility and change, which I think we're in right now. But I joined Innovate Finance because I grew up in California. I saw a community coming together in London in particular, but the UK more widely, which was around innovation, but that's such an overused term. It was truly around community, starting firms, believing in that idea that you could grow those firms, etc. We had the Silicon Roundabout come to be around then. And at the time I was working in kind of an external relations role, and tech companies were coming through the Bloomberg doors time and time again. So financial services met tech. I saw it as a huge opportunity. The UK government at the time also saw that, industry saw that, and it was a really cool time. London Tech Week had its first year that year. So you really felt that grassroots movement. And I just think it's a testament to the space, the coordination between the space, but it's only grown since.
Wow, crazy and amazing. So we all here, we are the FinTech Nation Summit. You know, we have nations from all over the world and fintechs and creating these fintech bridges and so much opportunity. And of course, the UK is a leader in fintech. We all know and we all learn from. And you have the greatest companies and amazing. Why do we need an organization like yours in the hub of fintech? How can you, what are you providing to these fintechs that they don't have?
I think it's a really good question. I think the most important part of the question is when we came to be, we served a need, and the industry's grown up so much that we serve different needs now. And we have to, we can't call ourselves a membership organization like most because we just have to remain so nimble because our space is so nimble. So I'll give you a good example. When we founded, I can remember putting the regulator, so the PSR, Visa or MasterCard or one of the big shops, and Ripple at the same table. They didn't know each other. That was novel at the time. We were developing videos on the concept of what is blockchain. I mean, it seems laughable now, but at the time that was so needed. This space has grown up so it's so progressive now, which it has two parts to it. One of which is you can use the term fintech to describe quite a few things. You can describe banking as a service and the innovation and efficiency plays that banks are working on. You can talk about Apple perhaps as the biggest bank that nobody calls a bank, or you can talk about the emergence of reg tech, consumer tech, etc. I think now more than ever, not only do we have critical mass in the space, which helps us to see trends and better service back to the community, but now more than ever, it's such a unique voice with unique needs. And I'll give you a few examples. The UK government, like many governments through COVID, tried to support the innovation economy. In the UK, we started something called, they started something called the Future Fund, which ultimately was match funding for venture capital. The ability to understand what the space needs, i.e., you're not going to get a loan because you're not revenue generating at this stage. You're probably going to need to have venture back for credibility, but do we go earlier stage, etc. And truly understanding the repercussions, not just in the next 6 months as we look to kind of short-term recovery, but the long-term repercussions of not being technically enabled as a country. I think now more than ever, we've served the industry. So just helping to feed back on what the industry needs on the funding side. Really looking at the international scale, again, adapting to the fact that we're living in a different world, people aren't jumping on planes. Is that a positive or a negative to how you invest and or reach scale? Certain parts of the market have done incredibly well out of this. And others we're not going to need to pay attention because More people than ever are in debt right now. More SMEs are going to be having to think about how they get through this period. So there's vulnerable, I'll say in vulnerable situations or in situations that they weren't expecting. So communities like that, that somehow sit outside of the remit commercially of individual institutions. And that aggregate view allows us to affect change and incentivize change.
So now you're using all the network, all the know-how, all the players, the ecosystem players that you collaborate with, and especially during COVID, you're turning this into real help to these companies, right? Like to serve.
To the companies, absolutely. And I think that's an important thing we've always done. But I think the better way to look at it is actually not only supporting the companies, which I think is kind of a good hygiene in our mind, but to leverage the incredible capability for the economic recovery of this country, but also in general. So it's less kind of what your country can do for you, but it's what you can do for this problem. Not to sound like the American in the room and quote an American president, but it's true, which is how can the capabilities that have been built, the technology that's been built, and the synergies between industry that has been cultivated through fintech look at the new life problem sets that we have coming out of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Things that you see in the UK, we can talk in general, but in the UK that there's still a lack, inclusivity, diversity, all kinds of things that we hear like this. Where
Yep.
do you see, yeah.
I see, you bring up really good points. I think if you look at the geopolitical landscape before COVID, you look at kind of wealth divides, et cetera. So we're talking about, you look at Black Lives Matter, you're looking at every kind of geopolitical event from a top-down lens. Gender divide's still there, racial divide's still there, geographical divide. So city centers having most of the talent, wealth, and thus it being more expensive to grow companies within city centers, if you look at the leveling up agenda in the UK. So I think there were some problems that were pre-existing that are completely spotlight on those right now. I think, as I said earlier, it's really about understanding how the space works in order to fix those problems. And it's getting voices. When you say fintech as a space, you're talking Google, you're talking massive investment banks, asset managers, commercial B2C companies. Everybody has to look at the problem set together. And I think that's why we've been successful, which is fortunately or unfortunately, we have all those parties at the table. And it's really about putting that problem set there. You bring up diversity. We've spent a lot of our time looking at women in fintech as a campaign. So we have a list called the Women in Fintech Power List. The way I allude to it is Christine Lagarde once was told, I can't find any women for this role. And she, I always use this as an anecdote, said, oh, that's funny. I have about 30. Here's the list that I have to hand at any given point. I see that as our list. So it's, if you want to feel like you haven't achieved, look at this list. These are incredible women changing the way this space has moved. But that's not enough. There's not enough women on the investing side of the table to help change the dynamic. There's not enough CEOs in fintech to help change the dynamic. So how do you look at, I call it infrastructure, but structurally, how do you ensure that you're appealing to the next generation? You make sure that it's understood as a career opportunity. So we have a program called FinTech for Schools, which is really trying to create not just jobs in the space, but financial literacy and ultimately social mobility. We are looking at how we can work with venture capital firms to better diversify their own talent, as well as be incentivized to invest in a generation of women-led companies. We're looking at just business practice and culture. So many of our companies were born in the past decade, much less the past 5 years. So when you build a company, you're building from scratch, build better. Don't fall into the traps that financial services and technology have had. Build it differently. And I think if we can have those conversations, give a spotlight to incredible people who have done it well, and allow that next generation to come through, hopefully that's doing a good job. And I think that applies across all diversity. You can't fix it necessarily overnight, but you can talk about it and you can unpick what's going on, and then you can put action behind the discussions.
Yeah, this is what I noticed, at least from the outside of your work, because I'm following you. You do a lot of I don't know, webinar recently and content. You put it out there. You congratulate the companies that are raising or doing well. You know, you have a voice, and
Yeah.
right, that's super important. Who's helping you? I mean, you're a nonprofit,
I
so
think our job is actually to have a voice, but ultimately it's not about our voice. It's about giving a voice to our community. And that's what we're here to do, which is to create a platform to affect change in the space. So we're a non-for-profit membership organization in terms of our business model. We have about 250 companies that are known members of ours, but ultimately we represent UK PLC to multiple counterparties on an international scale as well as a local scale.
amazing. Any trends or stuff in fintech? I mean, we discussed a lot in this summit about open banking and banks with open API and data. Something you can share with us so we can learn. How do you see this going in the UK?
Sure. I think we've touched upon diversity as a big thing that we're thinking and talking about, but I think it's really looking at maturity and recovery of this space. So how do we help companies scale effectively and responsibly? And we talked about the culture piece of that, but there's also the economic, the recovery that the world's in right now. So how do how can the sector support individuals and companies as well? I think you have to almost flash back to the last crash. The last crash fintech was born out of the last crash. Ultimately, there was a lack of trust in financial services. We had a digitally enabled society that was interacting just differently. I almost think of this as a 2.0 given COVID's response. So you've had an increase of digital banking users, and that's not just in the UK, that's globally. People are actively investing more than ever before because actually it makes more money for them than sitting in a savings account with zero interest. You have people in debt for the first time ever. And I say people, that's companies and individuals. So there's some very precarious interaction with their financial services that are starting to happen. Simultaneously, you go and look at F2, so Facebook Financial. I threw Apple out there earlier, but you see the partnerships that are coming to be, you see the companies that are newly coming into space, but you bring up open data, they're big data players. And I'll throw a third theme in here, which is, it has to do with COVID, which is by proxy of track and trace and or whatever country does whatever methodology of making sure that it can contain COVID, you are sharing data at a different rate, and yet you're more aware of it. We're having the discussions around it. Flash over to Australia. Through actually a fintech charter, there's been a review on the use of data through open data. And it's been flagged up by proxy of the fact that we're sharing medical data. So you have those three things working in tandem, and I just think we're going to see a shift. Now, I personally like to follow the money. If you look to the UK, we're doing better than H2 than we were this time last year. It's more concentrated deals, i.e. they have higher ticket sizes, but not as many. So I'll give you my stats because I have them to hand. H1 2020 was 1.8 billion was invested in 167 fintech companies in the UK. That's compared to 3 billion invested into 263 startups in the first half of 2019. So 39% drop in capital invested. But the figures for the first 6 months of 2020 are actually up on H2 2019, when funding totaled 1.5 into 214 companies. So it's more, if I talk to venture companies, anecdotally, they doubled down on their portfolio in the first few months. You've probably heard this a few times over. But as they stopped coming out of that crisis mode, people learned how to have investment conversations over Zoom. People were able to access different geographies because everybody was grounded. So you're starting to see money still flow. It's very public information that there's a lot of dry powder out there, but I don't think people will be spending in a frivolous way. You've seen valuations drop, and that correction was likely to happen anyway.
Right.
And yet you're starting to see there's a lot of investment opportunities out there. Will it be fair, equal, and a bull market through and through regardless? Probably not. but you'll see the correction that I personally think was going to happen anyway. There's also some interesting instruments in this space. And when you talk about maturity, you're looking at how the private markets are staying private for longer and how in fintech people get access to that potential growth.
Wow. Thank you for, I mean, all this knowledge, and it's super relevant for our summit. And yeah, we are a global summit, fintech nations. I've been here interviewing banks, neobanks, fintechs from Australia, from Hong Kong, from Singapore. And one of them is actually on your website, a member actually, Bamboo.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's great that you're talking. I think the important part about this is that none of this is happening in a silo. And like you said, the UK's led the way. Innovate Finance is the secretariat on the FinTech Strategic Review, which has been chartered by the Treasury. It's, as I said at the very beginning of this, you can't sit on your laurels. You have to change the way you're adapting the perfect recipe, is what I would call it. So we know a lot of the pieces that work really well to date, but like I said, there's new factors involved. And so I think it's really important that we look at it on a global scale as well, and not in a silo of each country by country.
Yeah, amazing. How can people follow, get in touch, attend these coffees that you do virtually right now, and listen to all the content that you're providing?
Absolutely. So back to when you say all the content we're creating, we usually host 4,000, almost 3,000, 4,000 folks into town once a year for UK FinTech Week and Innovate Finance, IFGS, Innovate Finance Global Summit. That's converted to digital activity thus far. So watch this space, follow us on all of our social channels, get in touch with me personally. I'm happy for you to share that information, because we always want to help support new members, and or if anybody has interest in the UK market, wants to scale abroad, etc. I personally would love to hear from you. So find me on LinkedIn, etc. Follow us on all those channels, because it is about the information flow. It's a very niche space. It's not just about traditional news outlets anymore. You want to tap into the insider scoop. So anything is helpful. I personally follow everything. So please reach out to us. Look out for us. We've got quite a few fun announcements coming out. We've got an investor day coming up. We have a partnerships day coming up. So get in touch.
This is what I wanted to hear. Okay. Thank you very, very much. And stay in the summit. There are many people who will probably want to network with you. It's a matchmaking summit, so it's all about connecting. And I hope to talk to you soon and attend all these amazing events that you just mentioned.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.